and welcome to day number 2 of SolarConnect. I'm Chelsea Moon, head of training at Enerflo, and thank you so much for joining us today. I'd like to introduce our session hosts. Joining us today is Julia Piper. She's the VP of Public Affairs at GoodLeap and is an RSA steering committee member. And then we also have Dave Jones with us, who is the Chief Experience Officer at Enerflo. Let's go ahead and hand it on over to Julia, who's going to get us started with our topic for today on compliance.
Hello, thank you all for having me. Everyone loves a little compliance chat first thing in the morning, right? I'm on Pacific time, so I'll be sipping some coffee as we go here, if that's okay. But no, it's really great to be with you all. Oh, sorry, Dave, what's that?
I said you absolutely do your coffee while you're doing this. It's early.
Great. Yeah, gotta keep sharp here. But no, really, it's great to be with you guys. I'm with GoodLeap, and we really, as a policy team, have been ramping up our own efforts in the space of tracking policy changes, not only on consumer protection, which we'll talk about today, but other changes around net metering, grants, incentives, tax credits, utility rate changes. And we'll get a little bit into that because it's becoming a more complex world overall, which then I think feeds back potentially into consumer protection related matters where we got to make sure everyone's working on their A game because regulators and policymakers are really focused on our sector right now, as folks are probably aware. So this is hopefully educational. Our team's here to be a resource for anyone in the GoodLeap community. So with that, I will share some slides. I'm seeing I just saw some of the polls come in, somewhat clear but challenging on the current state of compliance regulations. Yep, that sounds about right. Yeah.
As you're pulling up, Julia, too, guys, I think part about when we were looking at these sessions, I know this is, as she teased, hey, we're starting with compliance early. This is super important. A lot of people take compliance as a negative. It actually is better for the customer. It's better for the rep. It's better for the companies. And actually, as you look at these concerns and problems, as we solve them as a community, and again, Julia is at the forefront of it, as we solve as a community, the industry becomes even better. And all the stuff and some of those pain points can become better too. Even though they feel like pain points first, they're actually not. So this was an important session. We want to make sure part of the SolarConnect to get in here, get into the details. Julie got a lot of passion here, so I'm excited to have her go through this. But I think it's really important as a community, as you guys listen, like your Q&A at that bottom, ask any questions there. We'll get to them later if we can, but really it's important you guys really listen to the key things that we're looking for as an industry.
That's right. Great. Let's jump right in. Just a little disclaimer from our legal team. Every time that I talk about policy, it's not meant to be business advice for anyone on its own anyway. This is meant to be educational, but please also consult with your tax, legal, and accounting teams to make sure that this aligns with your business and that you are indeed in compliance. So with that, so I'd like to start by sharing this map. These are the states that either have existing consumer protection legislation related to residential solar or are looking at introducing a new bill. So those are the squiggly lines there. So you can see California, Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, Texas should actually be squiggled because we've just got intel that they're looking at a consumer protection bill there too. Florida, we don't know what it will look like yet, but some rumblings there of a consumer protection bill that would be coming back again after one they passed last year. You can see the other states there, Carolinas, etc., and Oregon. Almost a lot of the key solar markets, let's say, and if it's not already on the radar, we're still in August, it may very well be. Policymakers are reading the news, they're hearing directly from customers, their voters, if you will. So this is a really important issue for them. It doesn't take a ton of complaints for them to say this is something I want to take on, be it an attorney general, an individual lawmaker, a local government representative. We all have to be aware of how the whole industry is being perceived now and up our game. And so I don't share this to scare anybody, but more as an opportunity to engage, because these are opportunities, I think, to actually address issues where they may exist, but also we want to make sure the industry can continue to grow and be healthy. This is a little bit of what the landscape looks like right now. And there's different flavors in every different state. Some folks are really focused on disclosures, making sure customers understand what they're getting, but others are getting really detailed into, as we're working on right now in California, very specific inputs that you'd have to present a savings calculation. They dictate exactly what they have to be, down to the fact that you have to use PV watts for shading. So this is a new rule that's coming out. We're still working on it through CALSA, our California Trade Group, and others. But that's just an example of where these things are going, getting further into dictating exactly how the business operates, not just disclosures, not just other ways of operating. And that includes fines and penalties too, right? So in Utah last year, we passed a bill. We worked on changing it with support from the RSA and SIA and others from a bill that would have allowed a customer to cancel their solar contract up to 2 electricity billing cycles after installation and after operation if it was not providing the savings or the production they were expecting. That's pretty severe to have someone with no justification be able to say, you know what, I have buyer's remorse 2 months after install, I'm giving this back to you, and you installer have to take it off my roof at no cost to me. That would have been devastating. We were able to show that was an overcorrection, but they still did add new penalties for when the state fines instances of consumer protection issues. They did change it so you have to wait at least 4 days to start install, and they changed it so you have to provide paper versions of the contract and the consumer disclosure form unless they expressly opt out. And again, check the exact language in the law to make sure you're compliant. But that's just a story of how things start when we get engaged, where we end up at a more reasonable place. But there's going to be additional concepts that come up, and we'll get into more of where that could go. So I mentioned Utah. We are already in discussions with the Consumer Protection Division of that state. We anticipate they will come back with another bill in 2025. We're very confident because we're having multiple meetings with them of what that could look like already. So some of the things that they've put forward are mandating that all salespeople have to be W-2 in the state of Utah, creating a new registry for both individual salespeople and companies. And this is interesting because the salespeople would register with the Department of Commerce in the state of Utah. The companies would register with the Consumer Protection Division. So an additional registration in addition to existing business licenses you may have in that state. So these things may sound simple on the front of them or not, but they become real paperwork and bureaucratic burdens we'd have to comply with. And then what does it mean to be registered with the Department of Consumer Protection? It could make it seem as though a company's already doing something nefarious, where it's just supposed to be a top level registration so you're on their radar. These are the things we want to feel out and determine what are the real world impacts of something like that, even if the intent is well-meaning. Also mandating recorded sales conversations. So not just a validation call, but actually that entire sales conversation would need to be recorded is something that they've put forward. In addition to a confirmation call after the contract is signed. And also one that I think is going to be really difficult for any industry to stomach would be this presumption that a customer is correct in a sales related dispute. That sort of tips the legal system to have a presumption in law that a customer is always right. Of course, that's a standard that a lot of businesses will want to work toward, but to have that enshrined in law would be a lot of legal risk for any company, right? To have a customer always be right and you couldn't make your case as to why there may have been a miscommunication. So this is actually a case of where we're engaging actively. And I think the head of the Consumer Protection Department is very reasonable. She's open to discussion. And so this is our opportunity to actually step in and shape what these things look like, explain what is workable, what's not, other solutions we may put forward.
I want to real quick, as you're going through that, just so the audience understands, you're representing the community, but this is not just you alone. You're there, a part of a group that's looking at this together in representing the solar space. So like, I think that's an important one. You're fighting these and you're super close, but you're also bringing in experts and you're bringing in others that are part of this community so that it's driven by, again, the right answer needs to come out of this, but it's driven by your group and your kind of focus on that as your role at GoodLeap, but also across companies inside the industry.
Yeah, and that's a really good point because we're only as strong as like our collective efforts. And so if you are not part of your trade group, if you're not paying to be part of your trade group, they can't advocate on your behalf. That's it, full stop. The Solar Energy Industries Association at the national level, they need your dollar so they can hire the regulatory experts, they can hire the local lobbyists as we've done, and actually meet with the decision makers, right? There's no magic sauce. It's just pounding the pavement and getting in the room and explaining what we do as a business. I think we haven't done enough of that as an industry. And that's why we sometimes see these proposals come forward that are not workable. And they're, whatever you guys are doing already isn't working. So we, the policymakers, are going to throw something out there. You guys didn't give us anything else to work with.
Right.
So it's on all of us. And that's not meant to be, and I'm sorry if I sound like I'm like sounding like motherly, although I am a new mom. So maybe that's why I'm practicing. But it is true because we got to educate, and that's how we defend our industry. Because yeah, we'll work with the
Absolutely.
collective.
And we just saw this in the real estate space where, again, you have to come together, again, working together. It's not working against, it's saying you have to have a voice on both sides of the parties pushing this. And if we're not representing that voice, the real estate space had to go in and actually ramp that up as they were going through some legislation they needed to get through. And it helped a ton. It didn't land exactly where they wanted, but it landed a lot better than what was proposed. So I think, Julie, as you're going through, that's a good call. Like, get involved in that aspect because your voice is important to this process so that we can make sure it's a balanced discussion. Keep going.
And a prime example of that, yeah, it is in Utah where, the Residential Solar Association, a new organization, but one of the things we were able to do is actually was earlier this year, I think, when the Utah bill happened. It's all a blur. We helped fund one of the lobbyists that was hired in Utah to work on the initial version of that bill I mentioned with the 2 months cancellation option. And folks will know I was texting a group like, could you live with this? Could you live with this? How many days could a customer have to cancel their contract that would be too untenable, too much risk? What could you live with? And that's the information we need to share with these folks as well. So they know what industry, they don't want to damage the industry beyond repair. That's not their goal. They want to protect consumers. So let's think about what we can do to collectively solve that problem.
Absolutely. Awesome.
So I don't have to go into like tons of detail for all of these states. Just know these are the things on the radar. So Nevada, looking at some additional potentially bond requirements in that state. There was a pretty significant bill that passed last year. Folks will remember SB 293 that did put that ban on 1099 sales individuals in Nevada, call recordings, etc. We do anticipate that they will be back. Keep in mind that the lawmakers are in our social media groups. Like that's Senator Dunyate, who wrote that bill, has said, I'm in the Solar Pros Facebook group. I'm seeing how people are getting around the law that I just passed. And so we have to be aware that folks understand how the business operates. They're monitoring for good actors and bad actors. And it's really a call to action for us to really up our game and make sure that we are doing the work of getting in compliance and asking them questions, because it's not always clear what we're supposed to do to the polling results. Sometimes it's really challenging and not entirely fair because we don't get super clear guidance, right? So we got to follow up with them and make that apparent. But nonetheless, Nevada, we do anticipate there'll be some kind of bill coming back. And we're getting in early there too to try and have these dialogues. Connecticut has a task force they're working on. It's focused largely on lower income customers. We'll see what comes of that in the coming months. Georgia, I want to flag that there is already a 30-day right to cancel period in that state. And so something to gut check with your legal teams, understanding if you're truly providing that 30-day right to cancel for customers in the state of Georgia for all door-to-door sold solar systems. We also know we've been meeting already with some of the utility regulators in that state. They're looking to actually have solar companies have to register with the utility regulator versus say a commerce department. And we on the policy side pay attention to that because utility regulators are typically there to oversee utilities, right? Not private industry. And so we have some concerns about what that could look like. We'll see what happens there in Georgia. California worked on a bill there this year. We anticipate they did sideline it because we did engage in good faith and really appreciated those leaders for hearing us out. And they decided to pause on that bill, but fully expect that to come back. And Texas, as I mentioned, there could be something coming up around loan payment milestones. So I know it's a lot, and I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer, but this is, again, our opportunity. It's the chance to step up and say, we, the industry, are doing a good job. We want to work with you. Let's collectively solve the issues that you may be seeing. So if nothing else, hopefully this is a call to action. And if you want to engage, please always reach out to me. I can direct you to your local state trade group or others to get involved. So I'm going to continue on here, but any other questions, Dave, before we shift to?
Oh, this is awesome. This is super good. And again, this is just the beginning of those. And so you getting involved, reaching out, the RSA is involved in that aspect. So it's super important that you guys understand the issues and have a really good perspective coming from what we're taking care of the customer first is that perspective. Everyone's trying to take care of the customer first. Again, you're going to have legislation that's going to come in by, hey, we heard this from the customer. This is what we should do. Because, hey, we heard this from the customer. That's where we're going to meet in the middle on what that is. So love the call out.
Yeah. Let me quickly highlight, because Ben Millar, awesome individual in Florida who's leading the charge there at FLACIA. I highlighted that FLACIA has existing legislation. We could be seeing more on the consumer protection side. FLACIA is one of those examples of a trade group that's really stepping up to provide the industry with resources. I understand they're about to launch a new solar sales training program in the coming weeks. So if you're not already a FLACIA member and you operate in that state, great opportunity to join, get access to that resource. Florida has some pretty complicated consumer protection laws already on the books. And so we can often, just by getting in compliance with what's already there, can help us a lot. So they don't even, we realize, hey, maybe we don't actually need anything new. We just need to make sure everyone's on board with what's already there. And that's a way to protect our industry going forward. So reach out to FLACIA. If you operate in that state, that's the kind of actions that our trade groups take that are really valuable and will really support your bottom line at the end of the day. So again, in the interest of transparency, there was a press conference last week held by some of the highest levels of government in the country, the Department of Treasury, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and the Federal Trade Commission. They held a joint press conference calling on customers to report what they called solar scams. So this is coming again from the federal government, providing easy ways for customers to submit complaints. They're going to be looking for trends, looking for companies who appear multiple times, and they said they would take action. They have in the past. You can look up at companies that have faced legal challenges stemming from, I shouldn't say challenges, they've been pursued by the federal government for what is deemed to be fraudulent acts. And so we need just to be mindful of that. This is the scrutinies on our sector, and create some daylight between the limited number of bad actors and bad practices that may exist in the state, and separate out those who are doing great work, because that is the majority of the sector. I think everyone needs to up their game a little bit, because it is a complex policy world, and we're being held to task on operating in even more complex policy environments, which can create honest mistakes. But we need to separate that out from truly bad acts. But these agencies are paying attention. They released several consumer protection resources, things about what to consider before going solar, ways to pay for solar, and more resources out there. They issued a call to action to say, hey, companies, if you'd be willing to share these, that's a good thing to do, so your customers are aware of what to watch for when going solar. Do they qualify for the federal tax credit? We shouldn't assume that, right? So if that's something you're interested in, those resources are publicly available through the Treasury, CFPB, and FTC websites, and maybe something you want to consider sharing on social media, something to that effect, and we can share some links if helpful. But that was our call to action. It's, hey, warning shot, we're paying attention. B, we have these resources. Will the industry help us get them to customers' hands?
And Julie, to that point, my previous industry I was in, and when we went through this a little bit, what I can call out that Julie just said perfectly is, hey, it is a small percentage. I guarantee you it's less than 1% that are doing the bad things. But the other 99 that aren't, that are saying, I do good business. I'm not calling for whistleblowers, but I'm saying you got to be very careful. That 1% can affect the whole entire industry, and you shouldn't allow it. You shouldn't turn an eye to it. And if there's an issue or there's a concern, again, even in your own business, I don't do those things, but I know that someone else do it, or I know that this is a possibility. That's the stuff Julie said, hey, let's call that out. Let's get that fixed. Let's recorrect that. Because that 1%, if even 1% that we saw in my previous life, it was less than 1% caused the issue, but it changed regulation across the whole entire industry, and it actually overcorrected because of that small percentage. So again, not looking to say, oh, call it whistleblowers, but fundamentally, as business owners, again, we have sales companies on here, we have EPCs on here, we have loan companies. It's all of our duty and responsibility to make sure we're doing it the right way as an industry, not as, oh, I do it right, but they might do it wrong. That person doing it wrong affects your business. So I think that's a good call from your perspective. It is a small percentage are doing it, but these common issues need to be called out and fixed so we can move forward as an industry together in the right direction.
Yeah, and this is where it gets such a complicated issue, right? Because in California, net metering 3.0 is a very complicated policy world to operate in. So that's where it feels like it's challenging to operate in that full stop, and businesses took a big hit. So we're seeing financial troubles. And so is that necessarily a consumer protection issue? Is that necessarily fraud? Perhaps not, but doesn't mean the consumer didn't have a great experience. So this is where we need to pull the thread and work with the policymakers to say, okay, we hear you. Customers are complaining, and maybe those complaints are real. Here's something that's a true I know bad act we want to get rid of. Here's something that we also need to work with you to help us help the customers better. Give us easier ways to help them get to PTO, get their systems turned on, because that's a customer complaint, for instance, time to getting the system operational. That's not entirely in the industry's hands. So this is where we have to pull those threads. I do think there are other things that we need to be cognizant of across the board, really around savings. There's a lot of dialogue around savings, and I'd love to honestly know from the audience how you guys are making sure that savings estimates, savings dialogues are being held to the highest standard, because that is something that's not, you can't say is just a bad act or no one's necessarily doing anything wrong. But in these more complicated utility rate environments, what we predict and what actually turns out to be true can have some differences. And we need to start having a dialogue with the policymakers about why that's not a consumer protection issue so much as something we need help with, or we need to level up on and get resources to make sure the customers are aware of what their system will produce and do in the future. So I know I'm throwing out a lot of words, but there's issues that, again, I feel are true bad acts that we can put in one bucket. And then there's things that are getting more scrutiny overall, like a savings estimate, that I think we need to have a dialogue as an industry on making sure we're just operating at the highest levels there, particularly in these more complex rate environments. So working with the companies behind the scenes who are putting tools out there, I think is a huge opportunity for software to solve a lot of our problems, but just something I'd love to create more dialogue with the industry on as we go forward.
Yeah, and Julia, we are trying to stay, obviously, not an Enerflo show here, but I think, and again, I'd say any technology, with my history using technology, this gets super complex. And so I think we need to rely on technologies to do this. And because if you rely on organizations to try to regulate, it's so hard. So I think it is a call out to the technology companies, all of them in this space, that we look at this, we work with you and the team. And again, all the feedback that's coming in to really help make this conversation easy for sales and easy for the customer. So there isn't confusion, there isn't gray area. Be conservative in that. You can always have a conversation of, yeah, potentially, but that's the part where if you don't have any rate, any standard, it becomes an issue real quick that you're seeing. And again, your call out there is, hey, we have to work together. And the only way I think you implement that, and again, not speaking for Enerflo, but saying technology has to lean in, and all of our technology companies need to lean in and help that conversation, or it becomes so difficult, especially in my previous world too, where we had to have a rely on it because it changed all of the time. And if you couldn't keep up with that, all of a sudden you were in a bad spot. So you have to rely on some, again, technology. Again, you know this, and
Got to get in the weeds. Exactly. Yeah. I think everyone needs to be aware and educated in the markets that you operate in, but certainly relying on technology tools to get into the specifics is going to be key, because there's a lot of factors to account for at once. Energy is complicated. Solar is simple, but we live in this complicated energy environment that we have to navigate at the same time.
Absolutely.
So this is another call out just for folks to be aware. Unless you're a tax preparer officially, we want to stick away from giving tax advice. We all can speak broadly to the federal tax credits that are available. One thing I do see some confusion around is the bonus tax credits that are coming available around domestic content and energy communities. Those are the additional 10% tax credits. Those are only available for TPO products, so leases and PPAs. When customers own their own system and choose to pay cash or use a loan, they get the 30%, but do not qualify for the additional 10% bonuses. So just those are actually two different tax credits. They're actually called different things. We call them all the ITC, but it's not quite right. So just something like that, making sure the customers know what they're eligible for. And if they're eligible for a tax credit at all, they should really speak to a tax preparer. And so the IRS was calling out even some of those tax preparers who are providing misleading guidance with respect to some clean energy tax credits. This is with respect to how transferability is dealt with, one of those TPO-related tax incentives. But they did call out more broadly that there's misleading social media advice. They've seen a lot of dubious claims come in. And we know that not every taxpayer can collect the full 30% or whatever it may be in their first year filing their taxes. So really encourage folks to use the IRS's resources. They have a trusted tax preparer site. So maybe that's a place you can direct customers to, but just being sure that, our industry is not providing detailed tax advice and not enabling any tax preparer who might be presenting things improperly, because the IRS has noted that it's looking at that. All right, clicking on through here. Okay, National Solar Standards, getting a little more proactive, shaking it off here. What are things we can do? One of the things that SEIA is working on, they just became approved as an American National Standards Institute. That's an official designation. It means you have to do this multi-stakeholder process to create standards. Think kind of like mortgage industry. They have standards to be trained to. They have NMLS, a site where your licenses are housed. There's approved trainers that are there. You can track folks' records with an NMLS number. We don't know exactly if that's going to this is how it's going to shake out, but that's the model I see the solar industry going towards. So there are already 2 standards that have been written by folks who are elected to be on these technical committees, and that includes Mark Bench, who is the president of the RSA. This was a really closed door process. They couldn't share the drafts as they were coming together, but now the new standard on how to install residential solar and a new standard on consumer protection is available for public comment, meaning anyone on this call can provide feedback on what they think should and shouldn't be in this standard. Why do standards matter? I think these will be voluntary to start. So it'll be like, hey, my company went through the training. We install all our systems up to code, up to this standard. We treat customers in this way. We went through the training. And then the way it's proposed, you would actually get audited to prove that you actually adopted what you learned. So it's not just, oh, I did the course, I'm done, check the box. You have to go through some ongoing review. And that's actually an area of the standards themselves that folks may want to comment on. What's a reasonable amount of review? It makes sense that would happen. But for instance, in the residential installation standard on how to enhance safety and ensure code compliance, there's something like 10% of projects within the first 6 months of adopting the standard would need to be reviewed. That's separate from your interconnection inspection and in your permitting inspection. You have to do an additional set of inspections just to prove you were standards compliant. That's a lot of work. That could be quite expensive. So maybe that threshold's too high. That's something that you may want to comment on. And the Enerflo team may be able to share those standards with you. They're publicly available on this website here. If folks want to jot that down, or you could probably just Google SIA ANSI standards. These are some of the deadlines. So the residential installation standard, you'll want to get those comments in by September 2nd. And then for the consumer protection one, it's actually September 9th is the deadline. And again, on the consumer protection standard, there'll be something like, okay, it's not just company level, but individuals have actually gone through that training and they've gone through some kind of additional audit that they adopted that training in their practices. And then you'll get a certification. It won't be a one and done though. You'll probably have to do it annually or biannually, something of that nature. A fairly big lift, but it is our way of being proactive. Should be things that our industry is already doing. It shouldn't be a huge lift. We're installing to these qualities. We're installing and treating customers in XYZ way. This is just a method of proving that we're doing it. And I mentioned it'll probably start on a voluntary basis, but I fully expect states by state will make this mandatory, that to operate in their state, you'll need to prove you are in alignment with the standards. So to get your business license, we're already hearing, say in the case of Utah, some interest in pursuing this and making it law that, okay, to operate in Utah, you need to be standards compliant. I would fully expect a California and New York and some of those states to do it too. We don't know for sure who's taking this up. We're still finishing the standards themselves. What did they look like? But it's a way to set a new floor of ensuring everyone's operating at a certain level and that we're protecting customers in various ways. And so I mentioned, I think you all heard from the Ohm Analytics folks earlier on in this conference. They have spun off a separate company called Recheck. This would be a way that you track compliance with the standards. Did you actually go through it? So you can see their little screenshot on the left here showing SIA Ethical Solar Sales, got that certification. You can see if you have state licenses. This is meant to be a database, not where you get your training necessarily. I don't want to speak for their business model, but the initial concept is just a place to have your identity checked that you are who you are, and here's your correct profile within the Recheck system. And then all of your information can be validated there. Policymakers, installers, financiers, individual customers know who someone is, who a company is, and what kind of certifications they have. Again, I think of it like that NMLS system that exists in mortgage.
And Julie, I want to be respectful of your time. I know your time is very important. So I think we will go through a lot of this offline and maybe even have you back, Julia, to do a specific podcast about this, because I think this is so important. And time is of the essence in some of this feedback. So we'll make sure we get a lot of feedback over the next 2 or 3 weeks to help with that. So don't stress about it. We'll get that out from our perspective, from the SolarConnect perspective. I think this is super important from a community standpoint.
Yeah, this is probably just planting a few flags for follow-up. This is my last slide. I was mentioning I have to go jump on a call with John Podesta, who is overseeing the entire Inflation Reduction Act. So all the tax credits we know and love, he oversees the rollout and the implementation of them. It's actually the 2-year anniversary of the IRA this year. Yay, awesome win for the industry. But so I'll jump off here. But the last thing I'll leave you with, and maybe we have time for a couple questions, is just I mentioned early on that policies are changing. And so this is just a quick snapshot of the various places and ways in which policies related to net metering, it could be other types of compensation. Is there a fixed fee being introduced, like in California? By the end of 2025, early 2026, there'll be a mandatory $24 a month fixed charge that every residential customer has to pay, regardless of whether or not they have solar. So a little tee up there is if you're putting together savings calculations, are we factoring in that fee starting in 2026? Because that will change the economics of someone's 25-year solar purchase. So those are the kinds of things where we need to okay, let's get ahead, let's level up, let's make sure that let's get ahead of potential complaints of making sure we're up to date with the rate structures. There's some things we know, some things we don't, but that's why I flagged this as to leave you all with. I have so much empathy for the folks who operate state by state, who are working in multiple states, who are trying to keep track of this stuff. It is complicated. But it's also our duty to make sure that we're presenting things correctly, aware of the utility rate changes, things like system size limits, other grants and positive things that could be available. SRECs, are we talking about them correctly? It's a varied landscape. We're here to be a resource at Good Leap, and this all feeds back into ensuring the customers a really positive experience. I will leave it there. I'm sure if folks weren't asleep already, they probably are now.
Oh, they're actually active and they've got questions coming. So I think first and foremost, real quick, Julia, to not bombard you text or email, what's the best way to contact you? We'll get that out, but what's the best way for them to reach out to you? It's been 2 or 3 questions that have come in. I think let's get you that so you feel comfortable with that communication, and then you need to go get to your digital White House interview.
Yeah.
So,
I don't mean to sidestep, but honestly, the best way is to reach out to Good Leaf's BD team because they have the contacts with folks in our ecosystem and they can elevate for me. My inbox is a mess. I don't even want to show you how many, I have 310 unread text messages. So I don't even
we need to focus on the important things, but that makes sense. So the Good Leaf BD team reach out, and then, hey, they can go through that and vet those and make sure we're all aligned on not distracting you from what's most important.
That'd be great. But honestly, yeah, through the RSA, join the venues where we're having some of these conversations already. I try to, as a steering committee member, join as many of those meetings as I can. That's a venue where we can hopefully have several folks and have a conversation at once instead of going one by one. So again, join those trade groups. That's a great way to connect with me and other leaders who are working on this stuff.
Awesome. Okay. We'll let you, I know you got to run, but thank you for joining us. Great content. Again, I think this was a probably policy dump for a lot of people that were learning this, but this is super important. And so I think getting you here first, and then we got to get you back into a podcast and go through this in depth with you from a lot of our clients that are on the platform, and more importantly, just everyone in the community. Very well, they have to understand this. And they got great questions coming in. We'll try to answer these offline too without you because you got to run.
Yeah.
But thank you.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate everyone engaged. It's awesome to see the industry come together. I had the best tingly vibes when I see an RSA meeting and people are asking, they're getting into the weeds. I'm like, oh yay, join me on the wonk side. And I really am so passionate about this industry. We need these solutions when customers are happy we have the most amazing product ever. When it works well, customers love it. They will show up at protests to defend net metering because they love their solar so much. We just got to get back to that world amid this tense macroeconomic environment that we're in. There's challenges out there, complex policies, and just make sure that we're digging deep and stepping up. It's the only way we get through this and put this chapter behind us, I think, is by actually doing even more work now to set ourselves on a path for the next 5 million systems. We hit 5 million solar systems recently on the residential side. Let's get to 5 million more in half the time. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Appreciate it.
You run.
Cheers.
Appreciate it, Julia. Thanks. All right. Sorry she had to run again. I won't speak to her, but she's going to a very important meeting that she had to go to attend to that represents all of us very well across the nation. A couple questions came in there. I think we talked about, we're going to gather these. I think we'll probably post some response here on some simple stuff on our social media page. So you guys can go there for some of these answers. And again, those that are registered can get back in and look at some of these responses. Those that aren't, again, let's make sure you get registered. If you're watching with a friend, you can come back in, get registered to make sure you get access to these questions and answers so we can go through it. I think for sheer fact of time, we want to make sure we're jumping into keep our schedule. So I think first and foremost, I'm going to turn the time over back to Chelsea so we can keep on schedule. And then you tell me what we can do at the end, if we maybe answer some questions and some of the advertisement we're going to have, plus any questions that came in through the last 30 minutes.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we have a quick demo here coming up, but just want to remind everyone of the next session that is going to be starting at the top of the hour, which is the benefits of third-party owned solar systems with Benoit Thanjan, and that will start again in 20 minutes. So don't miss that session. But right now we're actually going to do a quick demo of Street.io on digital welcome calls and how they can help with compliance, which is now fully integrated with the Enerflo platform. And then we'll wrap up right after that. Let's go ahead and check this out.
Awesome. Thanks, Kelsey. This one's an interesting one. I love to talk about it because people at first get intimidated by it or don't understand it or why it has to do that. And the compliance side behind it is super important. But fundamentally, as we looked at this as a product, it's super important to look at as you start to scale your business, you start to grow and these compliance regulations come in. A lot of that is manpower to be able to do that. Operational, throwing bodies at the problem. And one of the things I think is important is when you're doing the digital welcome call, this helps you be able to, one, have an experience with the customer that's controlled through the technology and it's compliant. And two, you're not adding manpower. You're not adding operational inefficiencies by hiring a call center. We were on a call with one of our clients that said they had over 100 people in a call center that were basically doing welcome calls plus other things. And you look at this say, one, reduces that issue when you try to scale. And then two, you're able to have an experience where the sales rep's in the home. They can have a call. They can confirm all the information they've told the customer's being recorded, and it's audio and visual. So I think it's a really important step that people sometimes like, oh, what does this really do? But really what I saw 9 years ago when we did this for my previous company, Vivint, the biggest thing was hey, it gives control to the sales rep to be able to make sure they're going through their process and their customers answering the questions. So the company feels like all the things that the sales rep should review are being done. And then two, the customer is being protected and the sales rep being protected, and they're reviewing the things in which the rep reviewed with the customer. It actually makes it really clean and simple, but it also very compliant and makes sure to protect the customer and the sales rep. So real quick, it's a video and audio. It's all on the device. Once that is activated, they turn that over to the customer. They answer the questions that the company wants to have. Also to the financial partners as they're picking those financial partners, the questions they're going to want to have. And they're able to go through that pretty easily. So I know there's different companies out there and SaaS model, a lot of these. I'm new back in the space, has been in for many years, but as I've come over to Enerflo and I've learned a few things, also, again, working on this for many years on the Street.io side, it's very interesting to see the different techniques, but fundamentally, some of the experience I've had in this area, it's really important on a few things that we did. So fundamentally, the customers seeing those questions, they're reading those, they're being read to them, which is important. They see those questions, and then they're being recorded video and audio. So I'm going to give a couple, I'll just show I don't know if we'll show the whole 1 minute. We'll do 30 seconds. So two things real quick. One, the customer, before they start this, the rep is answering a question to make sure they kick off the survey. Really important for that too is one, you're recording the rep and making sure they have the device set in the right position so they can hand it over to the customer. And I think that's an important part of making sure the rep that's in the home is the rep that's talking to the customer, the rep that's logged in. It helps in that compliance story. And then two, turn over to the customer is going to answer those questions. The question is read to them, they're recorded, and then they're saying yes to the question or no. And then they're clicking yes or no to make sure they have 2 points of authentication.
Welcome to XYZ Solar. Thank you for choosing us for your solar energy needs. We value your feedback to help us improve our services. Please take a moment to answer the following questions to complete your solar agreement. This survey will both be audio and video recorded for quality assurance. Simply say yes or no, and then tap the arrow on the screen to proceed to the next question. Do we have your permission to proceed?
Yes.
Were you satisfied with the sales process from our representative, Dave Jones?
Yes.
Would you
So just for sake of time, and also we'll do this demo with each individual company that gets on the bundle. It goes through that, what you're able to do, and we'll talk about this when we talk about the admin portal. So I'm going to go to that real quick. So the user admin portal is the basically one-stop shop for all things Street.io from the administration side. So from here, you have the dashboard. You're able to see how many accounts are coming through and how many welcome calls are being done. you're able to set up, or you're able to manage with our single sign-on integration with Enerflo. We already have the dealer set up, the uplines already set up, but you're able to also see the customers that are created in Street.io. You can use that obviously to match that data and going back and forth. Teams, you're able to set up boundaries for your team. So if you have multiple offices or teams or groups, however you call it, you're able to set those boundaries for each one of those teams so they know what their boundary is. So when you upload leads, they automatically get those leads, or you can assign those leads separately. Then you have users. You can look at the users. You can activate, deactivate those users. Obviously, with the single sign-on with Enerflo and what we've done there, it's really exciting. You can do that all from there, and that's updated right in Street.io. And then leads, again, this is where you can upload your leads. You're able to do that batch. You'll be able to see it all across there. It's a lot of data sometimes. I always, when we're testing this through this operational beta, we're going to make sure we nail that down, because some people like to upload millions and millions of leads that cause issues. But that one's really easy. You go in, you upload that file, shows you the huge map. Any of those areas that you've created for teams are automatically associated. And then survey, you're able to see the surveys, you're able to upload those surveys, download those surveys, send those surveys if you need to for legal purposes. And then you're able to configure that survey. So you're able to go in, update that question, you're able to publish that live. So if there's an issue or a problem, you can change that question, update it, and it's live for that, for your sales reps right there, right away. So a really cool, just easy spot to go to. You're able to go through that portal, update, and be able to see all that information there. And again, to that survey, you're able to go in, update those questions, publish it, and they're able to answer those questions. So compliance and beyond, I think what's really important is when I look at this great partnership we have in this bundle, is we're able to take that sale from end to end, and you have all those data points and all of that geotagging all in one spot. And we're able to produce that report, and you're able to, again, apply it to your reporting and look at what you're doing to make sure we're always making sure we're making the right decisions for our sales reps. Again, protecting our sales reps and protecting the customers is that focus. So from a geotag of the login, who's in that login, who's logging in there, right? There's multiple logins, one in California, one in Texas. We have that data, we can show that. All the way through credit check to signatures to digital welcome call, putting that whole compliance story together, one, to protect the customer, two, to protect the sales rep and your company, and the finance partners. Everyone is really focused on that. We feel like this end-to-end solution helps you be able to have that whole story.
All right. So
That was a great little exit middle. So
yes,
there's a lot of me talking, which I forgot. That's our work there. So, hey, a few questions we've answered online, by the way, and I think there's a few there more that are coming in that we're trying to capture, and we'll get that information out. I think once Julia gives us approval, hopefully we can send this presentation out and make sure everyone's aware of the links that she had in there and the policies they're working on. Again, I've got a few texts that have come in since this presentation that, again, I think everyone is very interested, but then everyone is a little hesitant. Don't be hesitant. Ask the questions. They're totally fine. And I think to the first question that hasn't been answered, just real quick on that, there's already laws and regulations that deal with bankruptcies or deal with companies that are going through a lot of that. Yeah, there's scam artists and all that they try to get consumer protection and also vendor protection. That's a part of that and some of the different laws there. So I think it's a great call. It's frustrating. It happens in a lot of industries where companies that go bankrupt and they're left with vendors, they're left with, again, consumers that are in the middle of an installation process that those companies can't support anymore. Obviously, we've seen a few of those in the industry where customers are in the middle of their process and they're abandoned or orphaned accounts that we see. We deal with lots of different clients and partners that are trying to figure out how to help the orphan accounts. But as for regulatory stuff, again, something asked Julia on that one, but right now I think there's a lot of laws that go through, when companies are going bankrupt or what they're doing to protect obviously the company, but also to protect the customer as they go through a lot of the issues that we've seen over the last couple of months and the last year, to be honest. So great question. I think the rest we've answered. We'll get this information out.
you'll be able to watch back on all the recordings and share them with your colleagues, as well as other helpful resources.